безпека Сходу, європейського континенту і східного флангу НАТО. Я так вважаю, що ми потрібні не менш НАТО, ніж навпаки. Результати саміту гарні, але якщо б було запрошення, вони були б ідеальні.
If suddenly someone does not understand the independent, self-styled, original Ukrainian language, which of course I did not learn, I will translate it. In general, Zelensky said that all NATO security depends on Ukraine and, of course, said that they enjoyed the summit very much. In general, everything was fine. It would have been perfect if Ukraine had been invited to NATO. However, Ukraine was not invited to NATO. In general, welcome to everyone. My name is Kirill, and now we will explain in detail what happened at the NATO summit. Let's talk about what Ukraine was actually promised, what its paths are in the near future, and why once again we can say it has never happened before. And here we go again. I really hope for your likes, I really hope for your subscriptions, because everyone who squeezed a like and a missing bell is a beauty in general. Of course, helps us to change the information field and subscribe to the channel to always be aware of alternative sources of information. What's up? Basically, the NATO summit that took place in Vilnius is, well, still taking place, watching when you watch this video. Well, they were supposed to decide about what Ukraine will do with NATO and what NATO will do with Ukraine. They promised various loud statements that there will be the most obvious real support for Ukraine, in general, spoilerish. And many people in Ukraine thought that, well, they were about to be called to NATO and then they would join NATO as a united force and, as they call it, all the way to Moscow. However, the reality turned out to be somewhat more discouraging. Generally speaking, Stoltenberg made a statement that it, by the way, all these statements are detailed with sound and so on. You can watch it on my Telegram channel. Here's the QR code and there's a link in the description, whoever likes it better. Be sure to subscribe, because there is something you can't say and so how can you comment? You can't comment here. Well, you know, in general, Stoltenberg made a statement that we will certainly take Ukraine into NATO. But only after it fulfills the requirements from all members of the alliance. And, of course, here, in fact, after the war is over. That is, when it will be irrelevant to us, yes, dear Ukrainians, yes? Here, and if anything, I mean for the Ukrainian people, I am not Ukrainian, but for those who were very much worried about Zelensky and what will happen to the Ukrainian people, alas, I have bad news for you. So, when it will be absolutely meaningless whether Ukraine is in NATO or not, Ukraine will be promised membership, but only if conditions are fulfilled. Although a number of countries have joined NATO without fulfilling the conditions. For example, the Latvian army was not up to NATO standards, and Latvian laws, the way people are politically persecuted, various kinds of physical impact on people during interrogations and so on, are still not fulfilled by a number of countries that have joined NATO in one way or another. However, the conditions are special for Ukraine, so it will have to comply. And of course, NATO will help them in this, has allocated money. They're saying here's for us to allocate money. Would they? Would they really allocate money to us if they did not want to see us in NATO?
500 мільйонів на рік, щоб ми, власне, проводили реформи, що наближають нас до НАТО. Тобто це ще один сигнал того, що ми станемо, власне, членами НАТО. Навіщо Альянсу витрачати на нас кошти, якщо вони не планують або там планують затягувати?
As you understand, when you are allocated some money, this money, for example, is used to purchase NATO weapons. That is, in fact, it is paid and settled within the NATO countries themselves. In other words, they take some equipment that, in fact, does not belong to anyone, but nevertheless meets NATO standards. Accordingly, they take real money and buy this equipment from themselves and send it to Ukraine. And as if they helped Ukraine to switch to NATO standards, but they put a little money into their own economy and put it, as they call it, on Ukraine. And sort of fulfilled an incredible unrealistic assistance for this country to join NATO. However, again, the reality turns out to be not so awesome. In fact, Ukraine was once again told that we will help you with weapons. We will help you with equipment, as we did before, and maybe even more promised that in the 24th year Ukrainian F-16s will finally fly. They promised that there would be more equipment. Someone allocated 65 million in the UK, and they allocated something else. Well, in general, there is nothing new. As I said, many times the Americans sort of promised to consider the story of ATACMS missiles, most likely, they are on their way to Ukraine. I've talked about them in detail as well. So, anyway, what's my point? To the fact that Ukraine, in fact, has not received anything new, except for promises, except for some tasty meals and maybe some interesting companies at Zelensky and Company. In fact, they promise that the main thing is to win. And if you win, we will definitely take you into NATO, it will be obligatory, and we will not even obey Russia in this matter, as if they had ever obeyed it before. Only the problem of Ukraine is that it would be nice to win.
Я вважаю, що це абсолютно справедливо. Впевнений, що після війни Україна буде в НАТО.
But at the moment, in a country with unresolved territorial problems and with some unresolved issues, to talk about joining NATO. Well, it's practically suicide, because if it joins NATO, it will go to war with Russia. You know, accordingly, it will be taken afterwards. And there is an interesting little point, which I suggest you think about, so that everyone can answer the question: will Ukraine be able to go to the borders of the 91st year? It seems to me that it will not. And in the same way, most likely, Russia will not be able to take Kiev. Accordingly, some compromise solution will be adopted with borders similar to the current ones. What are we talking about? The point is that Ukraine will then have an interesting choice. On the one hand, it will either have to give up, as, for example, Latvia did in its time, the Pytalovsky district or Abrīn in Latvian, in order to join NATO and other organizations, sign a border treaty and so on and so forth. And with Russia, of course, Ukraine will have to give up Crimea, Donbass, Lugansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson and so on. And accordingly, theoretically Ukraine, having no territorial claims, could well find itself in the NATO alliance. But it is unlikely that Russia will allow this. And in general, these statements rather undermine the Russian leadership by not ending this conflict, because for Russia, Ukraine's membership in NATO is absolutely unacceptable. And in fact, it was stated that as long as the conflict continues, Ukraine will not be in NATO. Well, again, it will be only if Ukraine stays. In general, here, I think, there are more thoughts, reflections and other things just for the leadership of Russia than for the leadership of Ukraine. Because the leadership of Ukraine is coming back empty-handed. Well, again, this is my judgment. There are various interesting news today. There's a video of Bradley that kind of got dragged to our Telegram channel. You can check me out. Generally a lot of all these photos and stuff, Biden statements. Yes, by the way, Biden made a classy statement. He said that we, as they say, we will not wait for Ukraine, we will not abandon you, we will not lag behind you.
Не відстанемо.
Пане, для вас новина в тому, що ми нікуди не дінемося, ми від вас не відстанемо. Дякую, пане президенте. І я...
In this case, of course, the involvement of the United States in Ukraine, starting with those $5 billion that were invested in brainwashing in order to organize the Maidan of 2014 at the time, that is, the United States of America, as it does not back down from Ukraine, as it has been holding it by the breast for at least 10 years, as they call it. So, it cost Ukraine along with the dead and wounded and, most importantly, those who left the country. And abroad it's, you know, like the myth of the afterlife, nobody ever comes back from there. So, it was worth probably 10 million citizens for Ukraine. This is the story of the United States of America, which is keeping up with Ukraine and promises to keep up. Is this a positive thought for thinking Ukrainians? I have a big question. Another question is how many of these thinking Ukrainians are able to question statements, decisions and so on and so forth. Well, in general, these are my thoughts at the moment. Of course, something will be put, something will be agreed upon. We will see some new samples of equipment. But at this point it will hardly bring Ukraine any closer to joining NATO. So there you go. What do you think about this issue? Write in the comments, will be interesting to read. I will, dear friends. More materials to make you understand what I was talking about, you will find in my Telegram channel. Press Tsarist, Communist, Liberal, whatever you like. We've got all the likes. See you soon. See you in the new videos. Bye, bye. And guys, good luck.